And, as we go through today, today will be something new for you guys, but it's one of the tools of self-regulation. It's one of the tools that you can use on yourself and think through. It helps self-awareness. It helps all those type of things. And, when it was taught to me, it made a lot of sense. But it gets into a little bit of Buddhism itself and the Tao. And, these are what they would call the 5 Buddhist precepts of what the Buddhists would live by, or what their core values are. And the reason why I think they're important is that if you follow, or we interpret these a certain way, we will be able to self-regulate ourselves within our own weeks. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in terms of teaching this, and I'll let Margaret interplay this a little bit, I'm going to talk about them in the laws of a successful relationship, with whether that's with a person that you're married to, or you have a partnership with, or we can start relating this to the relationship with ourselves. Okay, and there's this concept on the prospect of discovering ourselves, right? We all know that we all believe we are who we are, and that we are just this way because we were born and this is how I act. But we know, as we've gone through everything that we've taught, we can teach you to think differently, act differently, and be better than everything you have now. But we don't know how to practically discover ourselves, right? And, as we've talked about, the narrative in our head drives our physiology, what drives our actions, habits, and behavior. So, change your body, change your mind is not really true, right? It's kind of crap, right? So one of the 5 Buddhist precepts, they teach us how to find our own life, how to find true sense of ourselves. It helps us find self-love. And these precept rules are really a governing thought of your behaviors, right? So when you have these 5 precepts and you start applying them to yourself in your own life, we are able to govern our thoughts, our actions, and behaviors based on these 5 precepts. And I'll tell them to you in a second. And when we can self-regulate our thoughts and our behaviors, we can start learning to live within ourselves. What I've done with these at times is I have written these in my journal, and I have just used them as a just like a reminder of looking at the 5 Buddhist precepts in my language in itself. And let me just I'll review I'm going to give you the 5 right now, and then we'll break them out a little bit as we go through here a little bit. So the 5 Buddhist precepts, okay? Number 1, we are going to avoid harming living things, okay? We'll get into that a little bit. Number 2, avoid taking what is not given. Number 3, avoid sexual misconduct. We'll get into that a little bit. 4, avoid lying or gossiping. We could add judging into that. Number 5, avoid intoxicating substances. Okay, we'll get into what that means on a deeper level. But if we apply these to relationships, the precepts are rules that govern something before you take action in them, all right? And, we run amok in our relationships on 2 specific levels, right? We fall in love, and then because we're in love, we forget how hard it is to create a relationship. We don't create rules and ways to govern ourselves until things go really shitty, right? So let me give you an example. I'll use health again. We don't govern ourselves to eat healthier until we can't put the pair of pants on that's our favorite pair of pants, or we have to go buy a whole new wardrobe. One of these guys, there's this real famous designer over here where I live. His name is Devel, and he has this really big clothing store in where I used to live in Reston. They designed your clothes, They basically tailored everything to you. And when I met with him, he was a diabetic, but his words were, you can't make my neck bigger, and you can't shrink my shoulders, or make my shoulders bigger, or lose my belly, because I have 75 custom fit suits. So
Yeah.
already he has language. He already has his behaviors dictated based on his language. So we had to change his language, right? So we've talked about the words interrupt versus intervene in business and in life. And the 5 Buddhist precepts can help us interrupt before we need to get to the intervening stage. Remember? Okay, we need to interrupt the path before the intervention, right? We need to interrupt unhealthy substances going into our body before I need the intervention, because I'm at rock bottom. Intervention, just to remind ourselves, is when the foundation of who we are crashes and we burn. Do you have anything to add, Margaret?
No, just please take his advice, because I crashed and burned. So just listen. Yeah.
Okay.
No.
So the idea is we need to starve off the interrupt, right? So our non-serving ego traits cause bound nature, and our bound nature is a non-serving emotional state that we get, which forms more bad states, right? We become reactive. We've talked about, remember, when our bound nature, and we get into that bound nature dance with ourselves, and our bound nature starts really escalating, we react out in a certain way. Now, that's not just reacting out towards someone else or your partner in a relationship. That is reacting out in your own self as a relationship in terms of with yourself, right? So avoidance behaviors, intoxicating substances, overeating, alcoholism, drugs. I mean, we could go on and on and on what that is. And there's many diseases that have been caused by the reactive state of bound nature. If we learn to intervene the bound nature, maybe we don't end up having those diagnosed states, all right? It's a simple way of looking at it. I understand that, but the simplicity is the beauty of it, right? You know, our thoughts get based around fear. We've talked a lot about that, right? We fear a story from our past, or we fear something in the future, right? And because of that, we self-sabotage in our own way, whatever self-sabotage is. We use those avoidance behaviors we talked about, right? So to starve off the interrupt, right? Even if we don't want to get to the interrupt portion, because remember, when we interrupt, we're already in the phase, right? We have to start understanding ourselves. We have to intimately understand when we start doing things. The fact that we are teaching this now to you, we are starting to take this knowledge and we're forcing it to bleed into your subconscious brain, right? So you start thinking about these things. So as you start choosing things during the day, choosing thoughts, actions, habits, and behaviors, you will start to stop and ask yourself, are these serving me going forward? The 5 Buddhist precepts really can, we've made them small and with 5, but they can be, you can list and really make them a mile deep if you want to. All right. So another example would be like understanding ourselves, right? When we outwardly blame other people, or we look back at situations and we blame other people or blame ourselves, we have to understand why, right? Like that's the beauty of the intervene, right? To learn why we did something so we can further adapt, that is learning about ourselves, right? So the 5 Buddhist precepts helps us bleed in. When you intervene and you understand you're intervening a stage, the moment you do that, this is that self-awareness portion that we talked about, where you have to ask yourself outwardly, where did this come from? Why do I feel this way? What is the situation? What is the experience around why I need to interrupt this ego trait or this bound nature moment, this non-serving point of my life, right? We all have unconscious stories, and we've talked about that that drives our physiology. So we have to peel back the layers on ourselves every time. Like, you got to peel back. And we've said this so much, but this is understanding ourselves, right? This is getting to know yourself. This is another tool in the toolbox that we're giving you to have more self-awareness, to help you help your subconscious brain learn to intervene better, right? And remember that bound nature ego, that's our narrative, that feeds our narrative. You know, they feed off each other, these ego traits. Remember, these non-serving emotions that we have, they feed off each other, and they just grow, right? We're always looking and working to understand ourselves over time, so we can learn from them, and now they become a positive aspect of our life, so we can understand all the type of thoughts and emotions that we have in different areas of our life. I use the analogy of a hallway with doors, and each door is an emotion that I understand. It's a door that opens up, and it floods me with information of growth, of understanding who I was and how I became a certain way, so I can understand that was just an influence on my life, and I don't have to be that way. That is the ticket to better understanding ourselves, okay? And again, we want to interrupt before we get this big fight. Do you have something to say, Margaret?
No, I just was going to add, like, the beauty of you doing that is, in my opinion, is that it creates the ability for you to have compassion for that part of you. You know, because in the paradigm that I use when I'm doing this work is, these bound nature traits aren't bad. They're just a part of you that are stuck with the wrong narrative. They're stuck with a bad worldview, or a bad idea of self-worth. But how do you get, if this were someone else and not you, for example, how would you help that person get out of that state? You know, you wouldn't, well, maybe some of us might, but you wouldn't just smack them around and say, snap out of it. You would, some people do try that, but you would probably try to coax them back into an awareness and an understanding. It's like, no, like, if this were a child, no, this is who I am. You're doing the same thing to yourself. So having the self-awareness that, okay, this came from this experience. Okay, so I'm not bad, I'm not broken. That's a theme of mine. You know, it's just, this is what happened. This is what I inherited. And it's okay. So it allows you to have compassion for yourself, which actually will then serve to start to heal that part of you, and then it actually will diminish the amount of times it comes up. We've encountered in this work, the more you observe, non-judgmentally observe your bound nature traits, the fewer and farther between they become. So I just wanted to add, in knowing your story, sometimes knowing your story helps you to, first of all, it when you just see your bound nature, but it helps you to have compassion for that part of you that's behaving that way.
Mm-hmm. And you know, the reason why we're talking about bound nature again is because when we get into these 5 precepts a little bit, the idea is you will have bound nature, your non-serving emotional traits will come up in these moments, and that's when you start learning to intervene before you need the intervention aspect. Okay, so just it's the, when we do this, whether it's relationships or people, it's the same for me in business with people or new entrepreneurs, where so many times they find an excuse to start later, right? Someone says, I'll start my weight loss program in 3 weeks because I got this, and this. Like, we always look for the best time, right? Yep. And like, and here's the thing, we all need to know everything in advance before we start part 1. And the truth is, we never make it past 3 or step 3 because we're always looking at step 7, right? This is your own personal bound nature dance with yourself. Like, we've used the bound nature dance scenario when you're talking with someone and they're coming at you with their bound nature, they're yelling at you, they're judging you, they have expectations you're not fulfilling, and then your bound nature interacts with them, and there's a cataclysmic explosion, right? The dance, about that bound nature dance, is no different in relationships, right? People end up fighting and not communicating, so they need to have someone intervene, right? And as opposed to learning how to intervene themselves. right? We need, as opposed to learning to interrupt before the argument even happens and learn from it. Like you can start feeling it come up into you, because we are interventionist. I've used that term before, society. Like, I've used this, when does the climatization of healthy eating happen, right? When we're overweight, for most people. You know, when do we start a healthy life? Usually when the worst happens to us. And that's like a classic scenario for men. Like they get a healthy life after something tragic happens to them. But if they learned these techniques to interrupt, you can change the whole foundation of that person, right? Or the house, or the mountain you need to climb, right? Like we've used in that before. In people's lives, in business, we always start looking for the new tactic, the new golden egg, the new McNugget, you know, the new thing that's going to make everything happen instantly. But it doesn't happen that way. And Margaret used a great scenario of riding the bicycle backward last time. Like you keep working on it, and then one day it finally happens. You don't know what day that is, but it finally clicks in, right? And that's the beauty of this. Like when you jump on these calls and you listen and you learn, we are feeding your ability to learn in the future even better, right? Okay, so if I had to start the 5 precepts in a relationship, and these will be with yourself as well, okay, or someone else. You know, number 1, avoid harming other living things, okay, or avoid harming living things, or avoid harming yourself, right? You know, there's let's be honest, there's times you get into a pissing contest with someone, or a particular person, and why don't you just put this in your mind right now, who it may be. You know, you quietly grit your teeth at the injustice this person has done to you. Well, I got one in my head right now.
Can I just jump in really fast?
Yeah.
As we're going through this, like, I think we've said it, but you have to do this to yourself ultimately, because if you're still outwardly focused on some of this stuff, you probably will have missed the point of the theme of so many of these talks.
Yeah, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this focus right back on you guys. So I'm kind of painting the picture right here, okay? Like when we get angry, a lot of us, we do passive aggressive stuff to the person, especially if you know the person, because you know it's going to get them going, right? And for some, unfortunately, it can be outwardly aggressive, verbally or physically, okay? So here's what we would ask you to do and avoid harming other living things, right? You need to remind yourself of this. Like you need to see your partner, your spouse, a colleague, whatever, with compassion for the human being underneath. Because of what you're learning, you need to have compassion for yourself first, right? If you can have compassion for yourself first and learn from that in these moments of that bound nature dance to avoid harming other living things, you need to see the other person with compassion in that moment as it starts to rise for you. Like that is a learned response. And by the way, from experience, the communication aspect of this right now is teaching the other person that this is how you want to communicate. You will not be perfect at it. All right. Your brain, every one of us on this call, everyone listening, learns at a certain pace and level. Okay. Let me give you an example. You have an argument with someone, you clear the argument, you communicate well after the fact, and you say, well, okay, here's what we decide. We're not going to go to bed mad at each other, or we're not going to walk away from each other, and we're going to talk through this and not yell. And you agree. And by the way, it's the correct way, right? Okay. Well, how does the brain work? It goes through 4 freaking stages, okay? And there's no timetable between it. So here's the beauty. The next one, you go at it again. Same thing happens. And they're like, well, we promised each other it's over. We would never do this. Well, like the other person judging, right, is judging because they have expectations. The person getting the judgment and the expectations in their brain, they're like, I totally forgot about that, but you're right. But like you need to communicate that this takes time Okay, have compassion for yourself first, because you're going to need compassion for the other person in a relationship. You need to have compassion to work through these over time. There's no way it's going to be perfect. A person in a severe bound nature state is no way going to be able to remember that. The person who's more calm and is judging and is like, oh, I'm going to get you on this one. I know it. And they come because they are already ready for you. Right? So there has to be a lot of compassion in the moments when you go to the Buddhist precept number 1 with relationships, right? You literally need to see them naked, not like physically naked, but naked in that they just don't know what they don't know, right? And you don't know what you don't know. Like there's a process to this. It's not perfect. But when we come in with expectations, when we come in with judgments, when we come in ready to go, when we come in passive aggressive, and you know that that person, you can set them off with that passive aggressive and they're going to fail, and you're like, boom, that's it. Like you set them up. Like you set them up and you didn't even know you set them up. And that's the crazy thing. You just don't even know it, because deep down, I'm in bound nature. Boy, I need it. My bound nature needs some more someone else's bound nature. Oh, I'm going to set them up. And you don't even know you're setting them up, because you don't think that. But you do, because you just know. And that's the craziest part about bound nature. Like you see them from a frustrated component. You see them in the moment, with compassion, you start seeing them of a past life, of the experiences they've had. But they have it. And here's the self-awareness cliche. They have those experiences where they came from, but you don't do anything to connect it. Right? We know inherently we're a product of our parents, of these situations, but we don't connect the dots to make the change. This is the change, right? Every single person needs to be going through this when they're in middle school, through high school and college. They should have a class on this for every single person, because no one teaches this, right? Like when we can just have a conversation, it's hard, and say, and this person's in bound nature, and this other person who's more calm but set up says, listen, I know we promised each other we wouldn't do this, so let's continue to work on it. Like that diffuses situations so fast, because it reminds the other person. And if the other person gets reactionary, it's not because that person said it, it's because they feel guilty and ashamed that they forgot. And their reaction is because they don't know how to handle their emotion, is to lash out. Like that's what happens. Like this number 1 is like my life, by the way. That's why I can just talk on this forever. Because this was me, because it didn't click with me until I realized that your brain goes through those 4 stages at their place. Like I am a black and white guy in a way. Like if someone called me and said, we promised each other we wouldn't do this, I would be like, holy, you're right. I just forgot. Like I've talked about how my brain goes white, right? Like that communication, for me I need to communicate that to the other person to help me, to help us, all right? So to avoid harming living things, it starts with myself first, right? And then it goes to the other people second. Then, by the way, the way in a personal relationship, the way you handle it, I'm guarantee you in work, it is handled the same way, right? So, and they just have different relationship aspects, and they just manifest themselves in different ways in different areas.
Can I just jump in for a second? Because for me, the huge flip in this narrative for me was when I really like got from here down into my core, the notion that, and I just said it earlier in the call, I'm going to say it again, it's maybe where I am right now. Nobody's bad, nobody's broken. And I've had people yell at me for that one. I've had family members yell at me for, well, what do you mean? They did X, Y, and Z. But the worldview that I operate by, and I'm offering you the opportunity to share it if you want to, it's your choice, is to view people as inherently good, as inherently respectable, as inherently beautiful. Because when you can do that, then that gives you the ability to look past the crusty veneer of what you see in them in that moment. And it gives you something to focus on, to anchor in on, beyond that. Like you can kind of push back. It's like if your little kid comes to you and they've been playing in the mud you're not going to think that child is bad. You're just like, oh, they're just muddy. Let's go clean them up. You know, it allows you to have compassion. It allows you to have an understanding that, okay, my child isn't, I'm not going to just discard them because they're dirty or they're wearing gross clothes or whatever. It's like, no, no, no. Let's take off these clothes. Let's clean them up. Let's get you a shower, whatever, clean you up. That's the whole process that Chris and I have been trying to walk y'all through, is the process of cleaning off your clothes, doing the laundry and taking a shower. Because the more you do that, the more that crusty veneer comes off. I wish I had thought of this. I've been gym hunting before. My parents have a place in the mountains in North Carolina. In fact, the little town over is called Sapphire, North Carolina. And one of the reasons it's called that is because it was, people find gemstones. They're garnets on their property, which is fun. We used to get chisel and hammer and go pull garnets out of the rocks. I found lots of sapphires over the years. But the point is, you have to know what you're looking for, because I'll find some for the next call. I think I have a bag of them upstairs. They don't look like sapphires. You have to know what the crusty veneered sapphire actually looks like in order to find it. And then you go through the process of polishing it and smoothing it out and cleaning it. It's like a white calcification type. It's probably not calcium, but sort of what it looks like. But the idea is that if you can start the process of viewing people as a gem or as a gem just waiting to be polished, discovered, pull it out, like, oh my gosh, I see that this is a gem. Let me pull it out of the rock and then let me polish it off. There's something beautiful inside. Mm-hmm. And I'll use one more example. I didn't watch it, but apparently there's a show on Netflix about some of the great artists. And one of them was, they were talking about the sculpting of David, and the one that's in Italy. And it was sort of like that sculpture, which is everyone considers beautiful, no matter what religion you're in. It was inside that marble before the marble was cut. So it's like, what are you seeing inside the marble of the structure of the person? Are you seeing the beauty that's the potential of who they are, or are you seeing the crusty veneer? So for me, as I learned to look past the behaviors, to look past the physical structure, to look past whatever, it just makes it, first of all, you got to do it for yourself. You got to realize that that's you too. This step one becomes effortless. It really becomes so much easier to do, because it gives you the ability to look past the behavior, to look past the moment, to look past whatever you're seeing. I know that was a long story.
No,
but
it's great. It's the best thing what we can do in Margaret's situation to get that is to take accountability first, right? And the reason is because it provides safety to the other person. Right. I think it matters. Okay, this is coming from me. I think it matters to say that we are bent, that we are a little bit cracked.
We've got that crusty veneer around us.
We all have a kink, right, in our armor.
We all have it.
And let's admit in full vulnerability that I can't do this on my own, and that I need you to help, and I would help you through that. That is self-compassion for yourself, compassion for the other person, but compassion for the relationship. I'm divorced, but I have compassion for that. I have compassion for what I've learned from it. I have compassion for the failed relationships I've had after. But from each one, I've learned on such a deeper level of my infallibility, right? My bent, my cracked, and it allows me to communicate way better. Because we all have my 4 stages of learning are unfortunately extremely long. And I've been able to shrink them now because I can sit in the moment in my bound nature and literally sit and pick it apart now quickly and get excited about it because I learned, and take that win, all the wins from that moment, and really get myself out of the sadness, the bound nature aspect of that, right? And with other people, as you learn this, what you find yourself is when you can communicate and teach this well, and teach it in a way where it's communication, not telling, because that's bound nature, by the way, that's a superiority. We're going to get into that. But it helps everything. You become calmer, which is a free state, a free nature state in a relationship, right? You know, and we have what, this is an interesting thing, but like the Buddhist precept number 2, simply taking what is not given. When you know this stuff and you use it against someone in a bad way, like that, taking something that was not given to you, right? You have to do it from a place of service where you're not expecting things back, right? You know, we have this amazing capacity in the society we live in that we need like these tokens after our name, or tokens on things we drive, our homes, our clothing, right? To show we're successful, like a BMW insignia on our car, the size of our wedding ring that shows he loves me more, or we judge ourselves against the token, right? It's to define who we are, right? We have a judgment on self, but we also judge ourselves against that. The letters after our name, how in my profession, like it's how many letters can I get after my name to show I'm smarter than you, right? The logos on our clothes. You know, we have to stop assuming love and respect is coming our way without earning it, like earning it through compassion and trust and safety. Like those are the 3 tenets of anything to open up and be able to be who you are, right? The mindfulness that you can earn the trust and compassion of someone else, right? We can't assume it. Like we have to first have it in ourselves, which in turn lets someone else have it, right? We have to have our own trust in ourselves. We have to be safe within ourselves. We have to be safe within our own skin, right? The other, I guess we like don't take for granted anything, but do we really understand that statement, right? Like falling into the comfort of a relationship. Are you taking for granted that relationship, but are you taking for granted yourself and who you are and what you're learning, and are you growing? You know, we as people, the more we ascend in growing and being the best part of ourselves for us, will allow our relationship to do the same, as long as it's built on that compassion and safety and trust to communicate those type of things. And truthfully, a bound nature dance moment in a relationship is a growth statement in ascension in your relationship, because you are learning about each other, you're learning about yourself, and those moments are going to happen, let's be honest, but don't look at them as a bad moment. Look at them as a moment where you're taking your relationship up a level, because you're becoming more vulnerable with each other to work through it together. That is intimacy, right? That's the growth. And you know, people start losing themselves in a relationship because they stop being the individual of learning about themselves. And it gets back to that intervention, right? Society, we don't learn to communicate because we haven't learned about ourselves. So we have those bound nature dances, we go at each other, and then we need intervention. And all we have to do is look back and understand about ourselves. We need to interrupt in those moments of conflict to be able to communicate before the intervention happens, right? You know, just planning a date night out is a Band-Aid, right? To prevent the further slide. Or we're going to take this really expensive vacation. It's our last hurrah to see if we can save our marriage, our relationship. It's a Band-Aid. I mean, buying a new car makes you feel better for a second, doesn't fix why you need the new car, right? We fall into these patterns. We have to interrupt those patterns and ask deep questions about ourselves. Any thoughts on that, Margaret?
No, I'm just taking notes. I thought it was good. No, just keep going, because
Okay,
this
so
is,
and just this is important when it gets to relationships, okay? They're like having a conversation in a relationship about nothing, like not nothing, just about mindless stuff, okay? Just like it's like you meet for coffee with a friend, you have this, just talk about whatever. In a relationship, when we have the 4 pillars, so you learn about yourself, we have one we call the 5th pillar, which is where you basically are pillaring your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, how you're living your life that day, or what you want in life, where you're going, how you feel, to your partner. And the reason of that is that you're sharing themselves in a naked way, in a full vulnerable way, so that they can start seeing you for you. But in that moment, you're seeing yourself, because you're talking about yourself to them, which allows the safety for them to experience those things back. Okay? That is a really important concept of ascension in a relationship. Like, you could literally have an argument one day, the next day you guys are fine, but you talk about how you've worked through that even after the fact, what you felt, what you've learned, where you can't wait to see us go. You look at, basically, you can count your wins in that, right? You can say, listen, I know we had a really hard day yesterday, but I learned so much. I had so much growth in it because we were able to intervene the point before we ever got to that point we always got to. And you were able to tell me that don't do these actions that you normally do because we promised we wouldn't do it. And, like there's a lot of great conversational aspect to the ascension of a relationship for yourself first, because you can articulate it. And once you can articulate it to the person, you learn it better and faster. But you're opening yourself up to the bond and intimacy of your partner. And that is an amazing, amazing aspect to the pillars when you use it in a conversational aspect to them. And when we do a lot of couples, that's what we teach, that because of what it does. All right. Any thoughts, Margaret?
I think you're on a roll. Let me push pause. What are you guys on the call? What are y'all, any thoughts for Chris? Any clarifications? Keep going.
I don't have any right now, but so please go ahead.
All right, keep going.
Okay, so avoid sexual misconduct, okay? There's some people use intimacy and withholding as a passive aggressive tactic to fight their battles, as a passive aggressive way to self-sabotage a relationship. The human brain generally has 20 to 30,000 thoughts of sex a day. And we can take that sexual energy that we have and we can direct it into other channels. Someone's brain and intelligence can be extremely sexy to some. And because they know that, they can withhold that sexual energy, and they can withhold that sexual talk with that person because they know it will bother the other person. So that in its own way is a self-sabotaging way of a bound nature dance. Okay, so we have to be mindful of how sexual intimacy and sexual thoughts come into play with the other person and how they interpret that. And if you haven't read The 5 Love Languages by David Chapman, I think, Margaret, is that correct?
I have the book behind me, actually. I had to put off the top of my head. Yeah.
I think it's called Dave Chapman. But basically what it is, I'll give you the short. Generally speaking, the way we present our love language to someone else is what we need. It's not what the partner needs. Okay? So if I'm someone that wants time with someone, but that person, their love language is words of affirmation, and they constantly shower me with words of affirmation, but it's not one of my love languages, it's not going to do anything for me, right? I may hear it, but it actually make me feel uncomfortable because I don't do that, right? I don't know how to respond to that. So that's my bound nature. But if she gets upset because I don't do it to her, well, that's my fault because I don't know her love language, right? So to understand your partner's love language is a great way to bridge the gap of that pillaring and speak to your partner for what they need, not what you need. And then you need to communicate what you need, right? So I think it's active service, it's time, it is gifts gifts.
Physical touch is one.
Physical touch is a big one. And by the way, something like time, it can be misconstrued. It can be time together, but it can also be time apart, depending on how you recharge your energy. Okay, so there's different aspects to that. So we need to be mindful of our needs, and real important, when we look at this, we need to know what the other person needs, all right? And when we say avoiding sexual misconduct, this is important. If you're not getting what you need in a relationship together, and if it's in an intimacy level, your bound nature will speak to you and you will do something else in a bound nature state because of that. You need to intervene that, or it becomes a non-serving act. Okay? Some people will just get mad and go shop constantly, right? It's no different than when we are doing avoidance behavior and things in our life that we need to avoid, right? If someone's avoiding us and we have bound nature aspects to it and we do something, we need to understand that and intervene that, right? You want to desire the person and not lust after them, because lust is different. That's self. Desire is about two people together. Like there's a very different aspect to that. And being lustful is a bound nature state, and you need to unpack that a little bit. Like generally that is because you're not getting something. I like to make this analogy. It's like when someone's on a weight loss program and they're doing nutrition and someone told them they can't eat something like a donut. They will lust for that donut to no degree. Seriously. That happens all the time. When you tell someone you can't have something, they want it. That's lust. This is just said. Lust is just done with sex, okay? So you're not serving yourself, so we get upset, right? We have to really think about that in this aspect when we look at what's the word? Avoiding sexual misconduct, right? The root of all suffering, I think this is not what we think it is, right? The root of all suffering is desire and lust in the absence of self-mastery, right? I wrote that down in this part right here, because when we can master ourselves, master our self-awareness, and master our four pillars, be able to communicate those four pillars, be able to communicate what my partner needs, then there's no lust. It only becomes desire, and the intimacy and growth and ascension of a couple will grow. So that leads me to 4, which is, and when we look at relationships, this is important, avoid lying or gossiping, right? Like we want to communicate on a level of self first to our partner, and then those type of things start working out. We don't want to lie to them, right? If you ask a question, just shut up and tell the truth, right? But be compassionate, right? We need to learn to master our ego and not just hear what we want to hear, right? If we ask a question, a lot of times people ask the question because they want to hear the positive of it. Don't ask a question if you don't want the real answer. Right?
Can I chime in on this one?
Yeah.
To give you an example. Bottom line is this is a form of self-deception.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's deception. If you're lying, you're trying to hide, you're trying to cover up, and I'm going to give you an example in my own life of how these things can be actually tied together. And so maybe to look for this, look for the root cause. someplace else. So this is going to sound really a little silly, but that's okay. It is what it is. So when I had a revelation of this not lying, I used to lie all the time. I just did. It was never, it's what we culturally, we would say were white lies. I just always tried to play it safe. This was when I was a little kid and into early adulthood. And I didn't even really realize I was doing it until I had some self-awareness, right? So I moved into stage 2 and then stage 3 of learning, where I'm like, okay, I'm going to be consciously competent. So I was consciously competent of not lying probably for 3 or 4 years. I just said, I'm not going to do it. No, I know this is my pattern. I know this is what I grew up doing, but I'm not going to do it. So 3 or 4 years, the only way is I had to literally consciously catch myself and say, nope, I'm going to tell them. It'd be little things like, oh, I filled up the car with gas when I was actually about to fill up my car with gas, that type of stuff. And, well, then finally I'm driving down 2-3 years into this, driving down the road. And all of a sudden I look at the clock on my car, and keep in mind, this is about little white lies, so to speak. And I look at the clock on my car, and I have this conversation with myself in my head. And this little voice is like, Margaret, does your clock represent truth? And I looked at it. I had a habit of setting my clock about 10 minutes ahead. Every clock in my house was set 10 minutes ahead. Tons of people do that, but I set it ahead for good reasons. And it was, I didn't want to be late. I was trying to be early. And so if I could set my clock ahead, then that would actually give me a 10-minute window, a little grace period, right? A little buffer zone in there. But then this little voice in my head goes, Margaret, does that clock represent truth or reality or whatever? And I said, no. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm actually intentionally trying to deceive myself. Mm-hmm. So I went then and there. So, in the car, I immediately put it to the correct time. I went to my house. This is maybe 12, 13 years ago now. Went and changed all the clocks in my house to the correct time. And guess what happened? I went from stage 3 to stage 4 of learning like that. I no longer had to be consciously aware of it. I just, the little lies that I had to consciously try to stop myself from doing, I could effortlessly do. And the reason I'm saying that is because where else, when you're trying to master some of this stuff, where is there a variation on the same theme somewhere else in your life? Mm-hmm. Because it's almost like the fruit of lying had a root system that was based in self-deception. And what was keeping this little thing going, the root system alive, was me changing my clocks. So as soon as I stopped doing that, this just shriveled up and died, and it was gone. So so you might want to look for the root of it mm-hmm. in a different part of your life. Yeah. Look for the themes that would be comparable to this. So in this particular case, it's deception. Where are you trying to deceive yourself? And then try to root that out. And then what you'll find is it just filters out into the other areas kind of effortlessly. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I couldn't resist.
Yeah. So, what this really gets to is, you have to master your own ego traits, right? That's why we spend so much time all the time talking about bound nature and your own avatars. Because it's not about hearing what you just want to hear. You have to understand why you want to hear it that way. Think about how many times we tell white lies for other people's ego traits, right? Now, I'm not saying just blurt it out and tell them, okay, in a bad way. I'm saying have compassion in a way. Like, there's compassionate ways. Like, you may be on this call right now and said, oh, I never lied to anyone. I tell them just how it is. Then I would say, what is that story? Because that to me sounds more about nature than being compassionate, right? There's a story why you just blurt it out and say, like, there's a pain, there's something attached to that. Okay, so remember, when we teach stuff, there's always both sides. Like, you can be overly positive person all the time and not be free nature. Right. You're hiding something. That was why you coped with something, right? So there's always both sides to this, right? When we have bound nature, when we're in those moments, we shape the truth to protect the other side of what we actually might be thinking, right? And we do that because we always think we're alone, right? We're the only ones that feel this or think that. And that is just not true at all. But we always feel we're always the person on the island by ourselves, right? Expressing ourselves because of how society views it is not easy because we feel like we're being judged, that we're arrogant or something. Being vulnerable and compassionate with yourself, that's freedom. There's a big difference to that. Like expressing yourself with arrogance and spitefulness and stuff, like people feel that. But when you can express it in your own truth and compassion, like people feel that, right? They understand that that's who you are, right? So no lying or gossiping, like that's to yourself first, like everything we teach, like that's the rule. You know, we rely on people on so many levels, but communication with your truth with your communication with yourself is the first way, right? The way we don't do any harm, right? When we look in the mirror, are you able to? And what are you saying? Or are you looking in the mirror just to try to make yourself feel better? Like we have to, like you really have to peel that apart a little bit, right? So in that statement with this, you know, this big talk on bound nature and lying and gossiping and expectations and judging, you know, the last one is avoid intoxicating substances, right? But intoxicating substances in this point, sure, we can say alcohol, drugs, food, sex. We're talking thoughts, right? That's the most important intoxicating substance we do to ourselves, and everyone does to themselves every day. Sure, cigarettes are bad, don't get me wrong, right? But it's our thoughts that we avoid more than anything, right? We ingest that shit every day, multiple times a day, and we don't even realize it. It's by far the most intoxicating consumption of man known in existence. Our own thoughts. And we've said this many times. If people said to you the thoughts you say to yourself, you would never speak to them again, or you would have a massive bound nature moment in the moment, right? So we have to stop ourselves in the conscious mind so the subconscious starts learning, right? This is how we start knowing ourselves, right? Like these judgments are grooved in our subconscious mind, and then it moves to our conscious mind, especially now when there's no diversion and we're all sitting there with our thoughts all day long, right? So that's where the intervene comes, right? And people judge others, or we judge others to make ourselves feel better. Let me give you a classic example. High school. Cliques. Girls in a clique. And then one of the girls, because she wants to make herself feel better, starts spewing venom at another girl. Makes her feel like she's not good enough, that she's not worthy to be part of that. And she believes it. When in fact, it's the girl spewing the venom that's insecure and doesn't feel good enough to be in the group. So she's got to make herself feel better by making someone else feel worse. Classic example. That's an intoxicating substance.
Well, and this is where the discipline of doing the daily work is so important, because there really is a biology to this that science has now proven. And I'll just quickly go through it. You have a thought, your body doesn't know whether what you're thinking or experiencing, they both are real to your brain, right? So you have a thought, that thought produces an emotional response. Well, what is an emotional response? It's a chemical response. So it releases chemicals into your body. Well, your cells in your body have receptors on the end of them. And so those chemicals will attach to those receptors, and then it enters into the cells of your body. Well, what ends up happening is as that cell reproduces, they've discovered that it will actually have more receptors for the chemicals that you just showered it with in the daughter cells, the next generation of cells. But what that does, it has these receptors, it actually sends a signal to the brain to produce more of that same chemical. So now your brain is like, okay, I got to figure out how to get more of this chemical. So it actually produces more of those thinking. And then now you've got this cycle of you literally are addicted to your thoughts because your physiology now needs that thought or something comparable to feed it what you've trained it to want and to need. So the way you undo it is to consistently starve it, so to speak, just to retrain it to not need those chemicals. So that's why we tell you consistent, simple, consistent every day. Because if it's not simple, it won't be consistent. But you do it every day, every day, every day, and you're literally retraining yourself. And then the beauty of this process is learn to flip the narrative. You will actually start to become addicted to the positive chemicals of emotion. And then that's when life starts to get really fun, because then you start getting addicted to these other emotions or these other chemicals. And then you start looking for those. Now that can be co-opted into something else, but you get the idea. So there really is a physiology here that needs to be overcome if these have been well-worn thought patterns. And for most of us, they have been. So sorry to interject.
That was brilliant. You can interject that stuff all the time. Just brilliant. Just brilliant.
Keep at it.
So, I guess it's just to review quick. We give you a lot of stuff, right? But it always comes down to, just to review, the four pillars: learn your language, direction review, inspiration statement. Imagine your outcome, count your wins. But there are little things that we sprinkle in to teach you better self-awareness so you can learn your language, how to understand it, why bound nature is so important in our everyday lives. Because our thoughts are the most intoxicating thing in our life and have been, and that drives our narrative. Remember, our narrative drives our perception of ourself, which forms our belief system, which drives your actions, habits, and behaviors in your life. All right? So we'll always get to the point, if I don't fix the narrative, then the actions and habits I have in my life will not change completely over time. You can do them temporarily because you're consciously aware of them, but you have to change the belief system. You have to change the story. You have to be self-aware. You have to understand what you're thinking. It's not easy, it takes time, but that's why we have so many things that we teach that always have the ever-evolving circle around those things.
And you said something brilliant that I just want to hone in on, that when we say the word narrative or story or whatever, he said belief system. And that's where that's what you're going for, is to, what are you believing to be true? That's what the words we're trying to get you to write out are all about, is to hone in on that so we can flip that belief system. When we say flip the narrative, that's what we're referring to, is flipping that belief system about who you are, about your identity. Who do you really think you are? Because that's what will drive it. That's what drives all. So when we say narrative, that's what we're meaning, is what are you telling yourself about who you really are? But yeah, it comes back to those four pillars every time. And that's why these four pillars were developed the way they were, is because they work, because they've got science to back it up. They've got experience to back it up. Just stick with it.
Yeah, it's I think if you guys could take one thing from today that's different than all the other stuff, is the fifth pillar, and how to talk in conversation with your partner or friend about your thoughts, about your language, about what you're working towards, about all the neat things that you found, that you grew from that, where you want to go, your self-awareness in the moment. That's an amazing piece. That is teaching someone depth. That's someone teaching someone safety, compassion, vulnerability, all the things that people want in life that people just don't understand how to get sometimes. Like, you can learn these things. These are learned. This is the emotional EQ that everyone talks about. This is how you get it.
Yeah.
Any questions? Well,
I do.
go ahead.
how can I phrase this?
Just say I'm brilliant, Henry. Just say it. It's easier.
Like, this is what I've been experiencing lately. Like, I know there's something, like, I know there's a belief system, a story,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't, this is language. I can't, like, get it exactly. I can't figure out, like, what is it exactly?
Mm-hmm.
Like, have you ever had this feeling like I'm on something, but I don't know exactly what is it
Yeah.
yet?
So let's remind ourselves about force versus flow. Don't force it. Okay. Look at doing the 4 pillars. Be simple and consistent. It will come when it's ready to come, Henry. Right. So no matter where the aspect of that, what you're looking for, or the story, whatever you find now, it's going to be 10 times deeper 6 months from now. But if you stick to doing the pillars and doing the work, buddy, and the stuff that you're working through, it will come when it's ready to come. When you're ready to come, when you're ready to become the man, to accept and become the person you need to be what you want to be. Like, it's going to happen when it happens. We can't, there's no force to that, because your brain is working through it at the pace it needs to do, as long as you're doing the work. If you're not doing the work, then do the work and it'll start coming that way. Margaret, do you have any thoughts?
I have another video to recommend.
Uh-huh.
So I'll go ahead and say it. Are you familiar with cynatics? CYMATICS. I'll put it in the Facebook group. I'll find a good video and put it in the Facebook group. But the picture of cymatics, it's similar to the backwards bicycle, and it ties into what Chris was saying. They'll put sand on a plate and then plug that plate into a frequency generator. And then what you find is, as they raise the frequency, it's chaos, 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 order. Just all of a sudden there's order. And so it's back to, do the work, do the work, do the work, do the work. And then all of a sudden there's clarity. You'll have clarity of what it is. Because Henry, first of all, for the record, I can totally relate. I really can. I'm like, what is this thing I'm digging around trying to see? Like, I can't see it. And then you just keep digging, and then all of a sudden it'll emerge. But you just trust the process. And like Chris said, don't force it, just trust it. And then it will clear. Another picture, just keep turning the puzzle pieces over. Just keep turning the puzzle pieces over. And eventually you'll see, oh, they fit together this way. And just trust that every puzzle piece you turn over is a valid one. Like, don't discard it. It fits in there somewhere. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
No, it's
Yeah, it does.
okay. So just to give you an idea, like when I discovered like my big story, I was just driving on the road. Wasn't even doing work. I was just driving. I had to pull over because it was such a big moment, right? The other thing, Henry, knowing what you do, the more you teach this stuff to other people, buddy, you'll get deeper. You'll peel more layers the more you teach it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure, bud. Thanks for joining us across the world.
Yeah, awesome. Love it.
Anyone else?
Oh, very good. Thank you both very much.
My
Yep.
pleasure. Well, everyone have a good weekend. We'll be back Monday at 10:15.
15.
Okay, have a good
Awesome.
weekend. See you on the
Bye,
Monday.
guys.
Later.
Good
Bye.
weekend. Bye.